Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah Stevens, and I'm the CEO of Elect Her. We are a very cool organisation, and we're working to motivate, support, and equip women to stand for elected office. And we want to nurture an ecosystem that makes them thrive once they're there. So we're not trying to do too much. But I love this conversation. I was really honoured Jessie invited me to come and chair today's panel, and I'm very excited to be sat here with some very cool people. It's a subject that I care really deeply about, and I think it follows on really interestingly from that previous discussion about integrity, actually, that part of the challenge is that people look at our democratic representatives and they don't see themselves, and there's a real lack of faith and trust that comes from that. And research shows us that countries that have more women in elected office see less levels of corruption, etc., etc. So this stuff matters, and it has a real impact on our democracy, how we participate in it, and how voters engage in it. So it's clear that those making those decisions do not adequately represent us in terms of class, race, ability, gender. And in this short time that we all have together, I just hope that we can talk a little bit about what the problem is and how we can move forward through it, how we can really overcome and address some of those challenges, because they are numerous. And we at Elect Her, we are pragmatic optimists. So we have to be realistic about the shit situation that we see ahead of us, but we also have to be hopeful that we actually do have the power and we do have the community that we can work together to overcome that. So I hope that we can maintain that through this conversation, that we're realistic but also hopeful. So I'd love to introduce the lovely guest here today. Lee Jasper is a strategic consultant working with Operation Black Vote. He was also the first Black Deputy London Mayor of London and Senior Policy Director for Equalities in Policing. Welcome. Gáibhin McGranaghan of United Response, which is a fabulous organisation really working to support adults and young people with disabilities, young disabled adults and young people to live the lives that they choose. Thank you. Helen Pankhurst, CB, is a women's rights activist, a scholar, and the convener of the Centenary Action, which is a campaign group working towards a gender equal parliament in 2028. We're also hopefully going to be joined by Councillor Zainab Asunramu, who works at the Fawcett Society and also is an elected councillor herself and worked with me for a long time. I adore her. So I hope she gets to come and sit on that stool in the middle. So can I just start off and to say that the panelists will represent different lived experience, different communities, but also by no means are we limiting the conversation to disabled people, to women, to Black people, that we really understand that this conversation around gender representation really does represent carers and parents and deaf people and young people and old people, that when we're talking about representation, we really are talking about having a true representation of our communities. So really, I'd like to just give you each the floor. Lee, can I start with you?
Yeah, thank you. Lee Jasper for Operation Black Vote. Can I apologise on behalf of the board from Operation Black Vote, David Weaver and Rita Patel. They're not able to be here today, which is why you've had to have a very poor substitute, which is me, but here to represent. Operation Black Vote has been around since 1996, so focused on registering the votes of African, Caribbean and Asian community members. And we've got a fabulous track record of pushing people through MP shadowing schemes, councillor shadowing schemes, and getting them then into elected office. Two things on the issue of representation. One is this room isn't very representative as I look around it. I've struggled to see people that represent our communities and organisations. So I think if you're striving for a new democracy, and it's going to look like this room, then it's not going to be very much different from the democracy that we've already got. So I think that the challenge that I would throw out to you is heal thyself, physician. Before we pontificate about what an inclusive democracy look like, maybe we can start with inclusive organizations that reflect the multicultural nature of our society. Are you with me on that point? Yeah, thank you. I think the other thing that we would say going forward is that race is one of the significant problems that we're going to see going forward in relation to the United Kingdom, and it's an existential threat to democracy. Because we've only got 5 minutes, so I'm just going to run you through the top line analysis. Starmer gets elected, has to live within the economic realities of the global economy, fails miserably. Farage joins the Tory party, gets elected after Sunak is dumped, and in 2028 takes on Starmer at the next election. Or scenario, Farage as Prime Minister, 2028. If you think that's ridiculous, then think back to what we were all thinking when Trump first announced his candidacy in the United States. I was one of them. I'm sure others were too. Didn't think he'd get elected. So I think it's very important for democracy that we place race at the center. The European history is one where economics go down, racism and fascism always goes up, always. And I have no faith in the ability of organizations to be able to convince the vast populace of the communities out there that, their best interests lie with aligning with Black communities, Muslim communities, Chinese communities, migrant communities, because they've been so ensconced and sheep-dipped in the sort of neoliberal racism that the national pastime is looking for scapegoats for everybody's problem. Remember 2008 bankers crash? Who got blamed? Bankers? For about 5 minutes. And then it was immigrants and people on small boats. You know, the problem doesn't arrive on small boats, it arrives in limousines. On the front of Whitehall and outside number 10 Downing Street. So we're very clear about the importance of race going forward in the 21st century. And these signs behind us should actually say, you know, how do we create an inclusive multiracial democracy? Because the country is going to be increasingly multiracial going forward. And if people think race is just going to disappear because we have PR or some other constitutional convention, they're crazy. We have to have a very deliberative approach about making sure that when we consider these constitutional questions, that the issue of racism and the exclusive and very powerful impact on people's lives is provided. They are provided with constitutional protection by the law. I don't want to be tolerated. Britain's a great tolerant country. I'll finish now, Chair. I don't want to be tolerated. You tolerate a virus or you tolerate an alien body. Hear this crap about Britain's the most tolerant country. You know, I'm a 5th generation Black British. How long do I have to be here before I'm not tolerated? I don't know, but it's going to be some time soon. I think the other important point for us is to say to your organisations, look, Operation Black Vote is now reasserting itself in the democratic mandate scene. We're offering an opportunity for mainstream organisations who are not representative to form anti-racist allyship agreements, which are a 21st century version of your equal opportunities and all that failed stuff we did way back when, before George Floyd died. After George Floyd, Black Lives Matter activists are asking for a very much more radical anti-racism. If you're an organisation that has not got colour and you want to move forward on anti-racist practice, then as long as you accept the principles of Operation Black Vote, we will partner with you to work with you to help you to develop your practice so that you can be more exclusive. But the room's got more work to do, the movement's got more work to do, and as a country, we've got a hell of a lot more work to do.
Thank you.
Try to follow up on the passion in my own intro. Hi everybody, my name is Gáibhin and I am the Policy and Public Affairs Officer with United Response. For those of you who don't know us, we are a social care provider and a campaigning organisation for disabled people who are living with multiple and profound healthcare conditions. And a big part of what we do is around independent living. So that is very key around that, like social care, but whenever we say independent living, that goes beyond that, living in your community. And we believe having an active stake and an active part in your community is a big part of that. And the first protocol we think for that is voting. I'll just throw out a few statistics and just in advance as well, I'm on the next panel, so apologies if I'm repeating myself. Whenever we were doing research for Accessible Voting Day, which is the first Thursday of every March, we found in 2021 that just over 2/3 of people with learning disabilities, around 2/3 of the general public we interviewed, did not know that people with learning disabilities had the equal right to vote. Similarly, fantastic work that was done by the Disability Policy Centre. I think it was the first of its kind in the UK to do a major study on representation and democratic accessibility for disabled people in the UK. They find that less than 2% of MPs, current MPs, are open about their disabilities. That's probably much higher, considering that we also have to factor in invisible disabilities like autism and like intellectual disabilities. And I think about less than 60% of counsellors. And anecdotally, we have worked with people who have wanted to go for election, people with disabilities, people with disabilities, entirely up to yourself how you like to say that, who would love to go for election, but they simply couldn't because the process was so convoluted. And equally, whenever they looked at Parliament or their own local council chamber, they saw next to no representation for them, so it didn't bode well for them whenever they wanted to actually enter the fray. And further to that, again, for referencing back to the Disability Policy Centre study, across all the major parties, same inaccessibility and barriers were there for disabled people who actively wanted to go into politics. 72% of people that they interviewed initially who served in politics in some form or another got into politics because of their disability, because they wanted to improve accessibility to others. So with my second hat, I am the public affairs coordinator for My Vote, My Voice. It is a national coalition of different disability organizations, disabled persons organizations, and campaigners who want to get more disabled people as a whole to register and actually vote in the next general election. So a key part of that is building a coalition of different supporters across the democratic and non-profit sectors, and getting politicians and prospective parliamentary candidates aware of what the barriers are and saying what they can do to help those constituents with different disabilities. It's been we had great reception. However, it's all well and good for an MP to sign up and say they're going to pledge to do this and that. It's very different until you actually see the writing in the manifesto and stuff you can hold them to account. We'll say that Mr. Tom Pursglove, who was the last Minister for Disabilities, did include reviewing reopening the Access to Elected Office Fund. And I know that Elect Her and that Centenary Action, Liz just over there, they're doing a fantastic campaign to get that open, to reopen that. We've signed up, and anyone who's here, I would thoroughly encourage them to do the same, but it needs to be a lot wider. The last fund was very restrictive. We would like to see that criteria opened so that a lot more folks from marginalized communities can actually have a stake in politics. So yes, just hand over to the next person.
Thanks, Kevin. Welcome, Zainab.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I was a bit late. Should I just go straight in? Fabulous. Hi, everyone. My name is Zainab Asunramu. And for some in the room, you already know that I wear quite a few different hats. The first hat is the Senior Policy and Public Affairs Officer for the Fawcett Society. I do lots of work for Elect Her as well, and have worked with them for, since 2020. The organisation that Hannah is the brilliant CEO of. And I am myself a member of elected office in local government as a councillor. I was elected 2021. Gosh, all the years is kind of merging into one. I wanted to first express my deep thanks to the Democracy Network for inviting me to speak on this esteemed panel amidst people I have tons of respect and admiration for. And I guess when I was looking at the question, I was thinking where next for representation is an interesting question, because next indicates that one phase of this work has already been completed. And for me, I feel like we are in a continuous cycle of course correcting why there aren't enough diverse representation. There isn't enough diverse representation in elected office across the different levels of governments. And for me and for many that I've come across, if we are truly to have representative councils, parliaments and general assemblies, etc., we need those institutions to mimic the way that society looks. And at the moment, we still do not have gender parity in parliament or in the councils. We do not have representation as it pertains to people of colour, or a diverse range of religions, and disabled people, again, are severely underrepresented. We have tons of brilliant organisations that you've already mentioned, working to ensure better representation in elected office across the different levels of government. To name check a few, Elect Her, obviously, Operation Black Vote, 50/50 Parliament, CAG, and the Fawcett Society, and others. And yet progress to full representation and full diversity is sluggish and disappointingly slow. And it's amidst this backdrop of sluggishness that these organizations are really pushing forward to make sure that a whole load of diverse candidates feel able and inspired to step forward themselves and throw themselves into the ring. And these organizations are demystifying the political selection processes so that people feel able and confident to put themselves forward. But there are still so many barriers in the way of women specifically stepping forward for political office, and even more so in the way of women who have additional identities. So for example, for Black women, on top of sexism that they are experiencing, they're also experiencing racism and misogynoir. And one big barrier for all is the lack of funding available for them to even start the process for standing for political office. Do they have enough savings or a political fund to use to campaign for leaflets, etc., before the official election period begins? And those are some of the things I hope that we're going to explore today. And just with regards to the Fawcett Society, last year we published a report called Open House, Where Next for Gender Equality in Parliament. And it's the first ever audit of audits that we completed, which kind of audits decades worth of reports into gender equality in UK Parliament specifically. And it showed that 92 recommendations spanning 36 different themes had been made to 29 bodies since 2014, but that only a handful have only been adopted. So we're doing all of this work, we're finding out what the issues are, we're unearthing everything, and then the implementation is where we fall flat. And that's why, you know, representation is still sluggish in terms of getting to where we want it to be. And also ensuring that we have this truly transformational, you know, system that really benefits people and works for the people instead of working against them. And so until we get those diverse candidates into elected office, with diverse voices, with diverse experiences, we're going to just continue in this cycle of the same repetitive nothingness to a certain extent. And I just think we need to push past it. We already know what the issues are. We just need to implement some of the changes. And I think that's where we're stuck on. And all the brilliant organizations that are doing the work to really push forward amazing candidates. Honestly, I've worked with Elect Her for like 3 or 4 years now. And the level of just brilliant, passionate women who know what the issues are, want to change specific things in their community, but they're still not getting there. And I guess it's the why aren't they that we will explore today.
Thank you. So really lovely to be part of this panel and to be talking at this stage in the conversations that we've been having. And it seems to me that we're all tackling the issue of democracy in slightly different ways. We have our pet issues, our pet ideology, our pet concepts, but we also, I think, understand the importance of the other positions, you know, be it tackling transparency, be it tackling the difference between the executive and the wider parliament, be it issues of the voting at 16 or the first past the post. And here we're talking about the issues of identity and the issues of representation, and it all cuts slightly differently. And I think the importance is that we continue to work on our bit of the jigsaw puzzle, but also support each other on the wider bits that we can. And there might be some where we actually disagree, and that's fine. And what I would like to understand better by the end of these 2 days is how we can be effective, not just in our own bits, in more people knowing our own bits, but how we come together in stronger coalitions where we can. In the feminist intersectional space, I think we're working already in quite interesting ways. So Elect Her, Fawcett, and Centenary Action have worked with other organizations around issues of disability, for example, but also around issues of race and diversity more broadly. But Centenary Action, if I can just talk about what we're doing and why we were set up. So my name is Helen Pankhurst, and the Pankhurst name is not coincidental. Earlier this morning, the issue of suffragettes came up, that were mentioned. I almost never go to a meeting around democracy and women's representation without the suffragettes coming up. They are part of the historical legacy. They're part of that cultural language of the need to challenge and demand better and to demand equality. And I think in terms of hope and ambition and change, they are important, they are powerful, because we can talk about the history of the suffragettes, that legacy, and the link to individual women understanding why they need to vote, understanding why they need to be represented and represent themselves. So for me, the setting up of the Centenary Action was partly to look back in order to look forward, to look back between 2018 with centenary of the first women being able to vote and 2028, which will be the centenary of equal franchise. We've got 2 elections still to go, and what we're demanding is equal representation by that point. So please join Centenary Action in that pledge to demand gender equality by 2028. Because if we get that, if we get equal representation in all its diversity, we're focusing on gender, but it's about representation of all sorts of things, including the issues of disability, including issues of race, including issues of class. If we get better representation, then we know we will get better politics. We have looked at issues, a number of different areas, and I don't, for the interest of times, I'm not going to go into all of those. I just want to focus on one thing that we've been working on, and that is the Section 106 of the Equality Act, which, if enacted, would force transparency from all of the parties around who they put forward at candidates. There's a lot of opacity in the whole political system. So much has already been mentioned today. We're just focusing on one moment, which is very opaque, which is the election, the selection of candidates. And what we're trying to do is show how problematic that is. And if Section 106 of the Equality Act were enacted, then we'd get much more transparency. We'd get much more light on the problem and therefore an improvement on it. And so if you want to know more about that, so that's one particular area that we're campaigning on. But in the interest of time, I think I'll leave it that.
Thanks, Helen. So it feels like we don't need to dig any further into like why this is important. We're going to assume that we're all at that starting point, that actually we do agree that we do need to have a more diverse elected representative in the devolved governments and the national governments and our local councils. How are we going to do that? What needs to happen? What is the action? So Helen, you started to mention about enacting 106. Feels like a simple one. Let's crack on with it, please, government. Zainab, what have you got to offer? What do you think of all the multitude of things that need to happen? What do you think the political parties can be doing? Let's start there in order to improve the selection process for a more diverse representation of candidates.
I think some of the political parties are already starting to do it. So they are having these schemes that they've put together to encourage diversity from the memberships of their parties to step forward and be like, okay, we want to train you to be the next politician. We want to train you in knowing how to, you know, be in your communities, how to be seen, how to, you know, how to get onto the exec of your political party in your local area, for example. And then we're going to show you how to do active, you know, proper campaigning, how to deal with social media, how to present yourself. So they are starting to do it a bit more than when I first entered politics officially in 2018. I'm seeing a lot of changes and a lot of political parties putting a lot of like energy towards that. I think that the problem for me lies within local parties themselves, because yes, the political parties may be moving towards anti-racism, may be moving more towards gender equality, but actually what are we doing about the root causes in the local parties in your local area? So for example, if a Black disabled woman was to put herself forward for a role or put herself forward to be a candidate in the political party, what are we doing to address the racism? What have we done to address the ableism that she's going to face? What have we done to solve or address the misogyny that she's going to, and the sexism that she's faced before she even gets to the point where they start voting for her to be the candidate? So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with local parties. I think that another big thing that's important for me is funding. For example, Elect Her have this fund called Fund Her, which is about putting money, removing the financial barrier that women have towards standing. So it's for women from underrepresented backgrounds, women who are disabled women, women from BAME backgrounds, and women who are disabled women, and from low to no income areas. And it kind of addresses that age-old problem of actually, if I am a woman from a low-income area, with a low-income working class background, I have no savings, but I do want to go into political office. How can I afford it? How can I, first of all, afford to canvass? How can I afford to travel? How can I afford to produce the thousands of different leaflets, not just one, because you need about 4 different leaflets throughout the election campaign or more throughout the election campaign? How am I going to put money towards social media advertising if I don't have that? So already they're cut from progressing because they don't have the money to even stand or put themselves forward. And so Elector and other organizations, oh, actually, I think it's Elector. No, there's other organizations, there's Mothered. They kind of do the Mothered grant, but that's Labour specific. But the Elector one is diverse and it's for all parties. And again, it's about removing that barrier. And it's not just about the campaigning, right? Because people think, okay, you've decided you want to go for elected office, and you might have some of the money you might get from your party for the leaflets and all of this sort of stuff. But actually, who's going to look after your kids? Do you have money for childcare? Do you have money to get in a cab to go from this area to that area? If you have to, when it gets down to the election and it's 2-3 weeks out, and you have to decide, okay, if you're working full time, I now have to go to my work and say, listen, I need to crunch down now. I literally need to be in my constituency 24/7 or in my ward. And your office is like, well, we can't pay you if you're not here. What then does a woman do, And so it's about like giving her the money to pay her bills while she's out campaigning, and all the other things, all the other unassociated costs with campaigning. So I think those are the 2 areas that I would like to highlight, but there are loads. There are many, but yeah, those are the 2 that I'll highlight for now.
Can I add a little shout out that fund is actually open for application right now? So if you know anybody, any woman that needs it, that's standing in any election next year, be that local or general, they are very, very welcome to apply to the Elector Fund Her grant. Thanks for that shout out.
And they're all such brilliant women, by the way. Support them.
Gáibhin, what do you think we need to be doing?
Oh, sorry.
I would also follow on from the political parties at local level, but I guess how I look at it is the accessibility angle of it all, and totally acknowledge that across different political parties, they are doing different things to encourage diversity. And yes, at local level, absolutely, some are doing better than others across all the parties. However, I speak, like, if I were minded to go for election, I speak from a very privileged position because I am autistic. However, I'm on that end of the spectrum where I'm a bit more mentally agile than, say, someone like my brother, whose autism is not only more profound than mine, he has an intellectual disability, he has quite profound ADHD. However, he is still capable and very interested in politics. So if someone like him wanted to go for election, nowadays, I would imagine many people, even the most well-intentioned people, would say, sorry, just wouldn't be for you, or I don't think you could really manage it, or, well, why couldn't they manage it? It's because the system in different parties is designed in such a way that doesn't allow for, well, ease of access, to understand the system better, to know what you can do, what you can't. And my take on that would be, well, if we wanted to have better diversity at a higher level, at a parliamentary or a council level, then it would make sense for political parties to do a lot more to make their structures a lot more easier to understand, a lot more accessible, and show different rules of what's involved with being an elected politician. Or indeed, if you even wanted to work in political office, and that doesn't necessarily mean elections, but if you wanted to be an advisor, if you wanted to work in an MP's or a councillor's office, again, representation is more than elections, I think. I'm sure everybody else here would agree. But whenever we have hosted our own workshops through My Vote, My Voice, that is something that's come up time and time again, where people who will say, they will say, look, I don't particularly want to go into elected office. I have my own reasons, but I'd really like to work in politics. I would like to help in the system, help my local MP or my local councillor. But whenever I see jobs, there's none there that are for me. What can be done? And indeed, we actually put someone in the audience whenever we had an event in Westminster, if anybody was there, put it directly to Vicky Foxcroft. And it wasn't that, it was, and likewise to Tom Pertloff, who was also there. They asked them separately, what are Labour and what are the Conservatives doing to make their internal party structures more accessible and understandable for people with disabilities, be they physical, mental, or hidden? So that would be my take.
Yeah, give them a round of applause. Don't be shy. Well done. Yeah, I think we share a lot of the same perspective, so I won't repeat. I'll just try to bring a little bit of added value. Look, in relation to Black, African, Caribbean and Asian people joining the political process, it's not just about getting black faces in high places. We've seen that in the Tory party, where a huge influx of Black and Asian MPs has coincided, and a rise in Black MPs generally, both in Labour Party and elsewhere, has coincided with the biggest growth of racial inequality that we've seen since the 60s. So we are now, as Black people, African Caribbeans, more unequal than we were when we had fewer Black MPs. Right? So the link between representation and equality is not about black faces in high places, it's about ethical faces in high places that are accountable, that are authentic, and that say what they mean and mean what they say. I think the other issue for us is that, look, I don't think there is an elected black male in any party under the age of 30. You can find a black male under the age of 30 in the Labour Party, in the Greens, in the Tory, elected, mind you, yeah, we'll give you a prize because they're as rare as hen's teeth. And there's a reason why they're rare as hen's teeth, because of the implicit racism of the existing party political system, which means that once you've got into the party, you then face the uphill struggle of coping with the institutionalized racism that is rampant within the party political processes. And that's across the board. It's not just aimed at any individual party. So you have to support people once they've been represented, whether they're disabled, whether they're women, when they meet misogyny, when they meet ableism, when they meet racism, they then need support in the party. And that means we have to have structural relations with the parties at the highest level to make sure that their parties are not hostile environments for those that go in. Otherwise, what happens is you have lots of people applying to get in, and when they get in, they don't stay very long, they drop out. And can I just say that we have the lowest level of black representation in public life now than since the war. And that's because at the local councillor level now, there are fewer and fewer black people standing at that local council level. Slightly different at the Westminster, but at the local council level, we're seeing a dearth of young black talent. It's not that they're not interested in politics, because you strike up a political discussion in the African, Caribbean and Asian communities, and you have to have a 24-hour license because they're not going to stop talking until you get them out. So it's very important. It's not about their lack of interest in politics. It's about the black democratic deficit that is a consequence of the reality of institutionalized racism in party political processes and Westminster more generally. What's the solution to that? I think the positive duty, which was watered down by the Tories under the Equality Act, it has to be brought back and re-strengthened. But I think more fundamentally, I think I could have all the black faces I wanted to be elected. You could have all the women you wanted to be elected. If you have a Westminster system that is still subject to corporate capture, then nothing very much is going to change. We need a systemic solution to global polycrisis problems that pose an existential threat to humanity and the planet. And you're not going to get that by having a sort of, all black shortlist or an all women shortlist or even an all disabled shortlist, as much as we would probably argue for it. So I think systemic change, fundamental systemic change, has got to be how we create the framework where we can get more black people, more women and more disabled people in politics and staying in politics. And can I just say finally in relation to black women, why would an Afro-Caribbean or black woman go into politics these days? Are you joking? The last 12 months I've seen an onslaught on black women's leadership. Whether that's, in Diane Abbott, whether that's black activists, whether it's, the Women's Refuge from Hackney who had the run-in at the palace, whether it's Muslim women, right? Time and time again, we see that when black women step into the space, and they do in big numbers, right? What they face is and they're not getting the solidarity, the alliance, and the support from the people around them that should know better and should support them. So I think changing the system is very important. Changing the culture is probably even more important.
Thank you. Some really powerful comments from our panelists there. we're coming close to the end of time, but I really want to make sure we can take a couple of comments or questions from the audience. So maybe we could take 4 questions and then bring them to the panel. And we pass around a microphone.
Oh, thank you. We have a question from Iram Woolley on Zoom, and Iram is going to ask it herself. So you've unmuted, Iram. I'll pass over to you.
Thanks a lot, Ruth. Yeah, so fantastic panel. Thank you. I'm Iram Woolley. I'm 50/50 Parliament. I'm also OBV alumni. And yeah, you're in the house. You're in the right space. So just to give you a flip shade, you know, yeah, I was listening to your great discussion. And I think, yeah, women do need to become more resilient. There is a lot of Islamophobia. There's lots of unconscious bias, but we get it from our own communities as well. So we're looking for support. But coming back to my question is, how can we ensure that we get more diverse BAME women voices to get a seat at the table to become MPs, especially when we are underrepresented and have financial barriers to running a campaign? Because these campaigns aren't cheap, are they? That's the question.
Okay, thank you. 2 questions. One is on the point of political parties. We've just launched a program to get more first-generation migrants to prepare themselves to stand for first election in the future, and we received 70 applications. Over 80% were saying that they do not want to stand for any of the political parties at the moment. I've had my own problems with political parties recently. And if you go like to recent demonstrations where you see a lot of migrants, a lot of Black and minority groups, they are saying the same thing about political parties. And today we've been talking so much about like how can we influence the Labour Party, this and that. Whereas when we're talking about the groups that we are working every day on the ground, they've already stepped over that hurdle and they're trying to find other solutions. So I guess the question is like, what are you trying to find as solutions to engage your community on politics that may go beyond party politics? And I think the other one is just a more general comment as well, that when people are getting elected, they are facing those really difficult problems. And I think today the theme has been about how Hannah White earlier today was talking about how Parliament, for example, is not necessarily suited to address some of the big problems that we have today, but the local councils also are not getting our voices properly heard, but addressing the topics that are important to us. So that bigger topic is a challenge for all of us.
Thanks, Laura. Just before I choose someone, want to ask if there's any men with any questions before I choose the 3rd woman, which I'm happy to do, but I want to give the men a chance because they don't always get a chance. No, I don't think they're confident enough to ask a question. So we'll go for a 3rd woman.
We'll be counselling after this.
I can pretend to be a man if you want.
Definitely don't.
My name is Bella. I'm leading of the anti-party movement, and thank you so much to the panel for all your inspiring insights and experience and initiatives. My question is, there's been a lot of talk about changing the system, and I completely agree with everything that's been said so far. We definitely need more diversity and representation, and maybe a systems change suggestion could be electing people by sortition and lot, so you can ensure representation rather than having to rely on the electoral system that's been costly, divisive, and yeah, the whole competitiveness of it is really distracting. It's just a huge, so why don't we just sidestep that completely and ensure representation by sortition and lot?
Thanks, Bella. Anyone from over here? Sophie.
Thank you. So I'm founding a new organisation called Elect Youth, which is aimed at supporting more young people to stand and get elected. And one of the pieces of feedback I get is that kind of, why do we care about young people? I mean, they're kind of the same as older people, like who cares? And age as a protected characteristic tends to be quite overlooked. even though we find that older politicians tend to vote and act in the interests of older people, we see big intergenerational divides in the country. And I guess it comes back to the fundamental premise, Hannah, you started the panel on, was kind of, we all accept that it's important to get a better representation, but actually I've encountered quite a lot of barriers to that. So I'd love to kind of brainstorm or crowdsource some ideas about how to respond to some of those issues when other protected characteristics get told that their protected characteristics don't really matter.
Okay, so we've got Iram talking about supporting BAME women candidates. We've got Lara talking about young people disaffected with the political parties and having political motivation, but not wanting to choose one of the teams. We're talking about changing the voting system to support a more diverse representation. And we're talking about supporting young people, but examining different protected characteristics. I think we've got about 4 minutes. So can I invite you each to choose one piece to respond to? Will that work?
Yeah, I hear Lara's point very loud and clear about the internal barriers that are in different political parties and just how intersectional they all are. And really not really looking at how the solutions could be intersectional, but speaking from like the disability perspective, if you want to get involved with a political party, one of the first things they will look at is just how mobile you are mentally and physically. And if you say to them, I'm not really a fan of canvassing, almost immediately it'll be, what can you do then? Meanwhile, you haven't asked, oh, but like I have a special interest in this policy area, or I'm pretty good with Excel sheets, or I'm really good at organization. It's looking at different ways again and restructuring things and how to make it more accessible. And if you take that to a broader level, from local level to regional level to national level in the political parties, then you'll start to see, hopefully that would be the idea, of actual political spaces like the council chamber and parliament reflecting that. But until the major parties start doing that more intensively, more seriously, I know local parties are doing better than others, but if collectively, if all parties aren't doing it, then how can we really say that we've got a representative democracy if we don't allow people with different needs and different beliefs to get into that?
I reinforce that because we're all different, but we're all equal. And I think we just have to accept that's the nature of our reality. I'm just going to pick up one aspect. I think in relation to what you said, a very important point in relation to sortition and selection, because I think that what we've come to the conclusion is OBV's just finished a 3-year strategic review, and talking to our constituents, talking to our people, what they're saying is we don't want to stand in political parties because we're not faring well. I'd rather stand as an independent in my area. So we're developing a whole new pathway to support the selection of independents through sortition. Well, maybe not through sortition because it could be quite expensive. It's the best democracy money can buy, and we haven't got a lot of it. But on a citizens' assembly, a local assembly, choosing to say, yes, if I'm selected, I will adopt that agenda as my manifesto, I think offers an alternative democracy to opportunity. I also think Operation Black Vote's in partnership with the Humanity Project around this. The Humanity Project is a new orientation to politics in the UK. I don't have time to explain it to you now, but if you can look it up, I think one of our people is here in the audience. He's there, yeah, Lachlan, right there behind you. Yeah, Humanity Project, he can tell you much more about it. But I mean, essentially, they're putting that formulation together. So if there is others in the room that are doing that, I think that would be absolutely incredible. And then finally, the Operation Black Vote has got a massive voter registration campaign targeted at Black and ethnic minority and Asian voters. It's in partnership with the Black Equity Organisation, and we're going to focus the biggest Black voter registration campaign we've ever seen in this forthcoming election. There is also a National Voter Registration Alliance, which meets and is convened by Operation Black Vote. That is everybody who's working in the democratic reform and Black and ethnic minority voter registration space to come together, to work better together and to avoid duplication and make partnerships. Next meeting is next Friday in Brixton, and you're all invited, so do come along. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take the question on how to get more BAME women into politics, because it's a passion area of mine, and it's a project that I was kind of responsible for when I was working at Elect Her. And it was on the premise of, you know, the fact that BAME with Black, Asian, ethnic minority women were coming forward and saying, do you know what, like we want to get more involved in politics and we want the support, but actually some of our biggest barriers are white women. I'm just going to say it, you know, that was one of the things that they were saying. They were saying that, you know, we come to some of the sessions and it's great, but we feel like we can't be our authentic selves and we can't talk about the real issues that are plaguing us because there are white women in the room that will downplay it, or there are white women in the room who will just be like, oh, but just get over it, like you could be stronger, and stuff like that. And so, you know, part of the work was about making sure that we carved out that safe space for Black women and Black, Asian, ethnic minority women to come together and talk about some of the issues that they're facing in a non-judgmental forum, but also acknowledge that we're not a monolith. You know, there are also differences between the Black, the Asian, and the other, you know, and the other ethnicities in the minority category. And so actually, you know, further having safe spaces for each of those different identities was something that we explored and we looked at as well, where, you know, Black women could talk about, okay, actually, BAME doesn't fit us. Can we talk about like what it means to be Black in society and Black in politics right now, and stuff like that. But it was really important for us to have the unity of BAME, but also acknowledge that there are specific things specific to your race that you want to talk about. So we had like, you know, sessions where it was just for BAME women, for them to talk and explore and think about their political pathways. And also, you know, some of those women went on to create their own support groups. So I'm part of quite a few BAME groups full of women who are supporting each other, amplifying each other's voices and just like being our champion. But I'm also part of Black women groups where we're just talking about issues that pertain to Black women and the Black experience in the UK. And so I think that those safe spaces for BAME women are really important, because actually you do need that space away from the gaze to be able to explore your political pathway and talk very truthfully about some of the barriers you're facing. And then I also want to highlight the importance of allies. And, you know, if you are a white woman in a political party and you are you know that there's a Black woman or an Asian woman or an ethnic minority woman who is wanting to get, you know, put herself forward for elected office, making sure that if you see misogynoir, you're calling it out, making sure that if you're seeing, you know, specific things, racialized things that are happening around you, that you're calling it out. You know, and there's that whole thing about calling out, calling in, which is better. You can only decide. But actually, I'm very much, if the offense happens publicly, then you should address it publicly, because there'll be other people in the room that will also learn the lesson. So I guess that those are things that I'd say about solidarity and ensuring that more Black women want to stay in politics and also are being pushed forward in and being inspired to stand. Hope that helps, Iram.
I see quite a lot of parallels between what we're all saying and what the questions have been around the fact that there has been a cookie cutter model of what a parliamentarian is, and linked to a particular party. So that's the model we've had in the past. And I think what we're all saying here, and what a lot of the day has been about, is that that's problematic. It's problematic because of the poor representation. It's problematic because of how the systems have ended up being dysfunctional for one reason or another. And therefore, what we need to do is address the system and address representation. So for me, it isn't one or the other. It's the links between the two, and it's understanding the nuance within it and the who's included and who's not included, and how some people are comfortable with changes on some edges, but not on others. And I think the importance of spaces like this is it allows us to hear some of the other changes. So, you know, the youth vote, the 16-year-old vote, or again, issues of representation, etc. So I think, just to conclude, the most important thing is that we listen and look at possibilities of change wherever they are, and there isn't a single solution to any of this.
Yeah. Thanks, Helen. And therefore, collaboration, learning from each other, sharing, talking, coming together, convening in this way that we've been able to in these 2 days is such an important part of the journey to making things better. And they have to get better. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, fantastic, lovely panelists. Obviously, we could have talked about this for 7.5 hours. Slightly disappointed we didn't. Maybe we can do afterwards. So if anyone wants to carry on the chat in and around over the next few days, please do. I love it. I think we all love it, which is why we're sat here. So come back to us for questions. Thank you to Jessie and the very, very cool team at the Democracy Network for bringing us all together today. Thanks.